The trenches are done. After months of digging, state tests to get my license, planning, replanning, everything else. The trenches are done, the channels are in. I've got the permit guy coming hopefully in the next week or so just to kind of spot check things. I still got to put the crossovers in, but the worst is done. So let's follow the water. Crossover goes here, banks out in both directions. Crossover here, so that's 20 feet. There's another 20 feet. Crossover to 28 feet. Now this will terminate there, and there's a crossover here. Terminates there. This is 36 foot. Crosses over here. Oh man, there's stuff in my way. To another 20 foot. No, 24 foot. Oh, that shifted. I gotta fix that. I still need to finish digging that out. Another 24. I gotta dig out this crossover to the 88 foot. $280 worth of channel. And I think I put this run in backwards. I really hope that's not the case, and I hope the permit guy doesn't catch that or call me out on it. Because originally it was supposed to come from the septic tank over there, come to a distribution box, and be 3 runs of 90 something, I don't know, whatever. But it was supposed to feed into here, which is why this one's backwards. Again, hopefully he doesn't catch this. But it's literally taken me months to get this far. I gotta do the crossovers, but I am very happy with where I ended today. It's going to be so much backfill. So that is the septic system. The trenches are done. After months of digging, state tests to get my license, planning, replanning, everything else. The trenches are done, the channels are in. I've got the permit guy coming hopefully in the next week or so just to kind of spot check things. I still got to put the crossovers in, but the worst is done. So let's follow the water. Crossover goes here, banks out in both directions. Crossover here, so that's 20 feet. There's another 20 feet. Crossover to 28 feet. Now this will terminate there, and there's a crossover here. Oy. Terminates there. This is 36 foot. Crosses over here. Oh man, there's stuff in my way. To another 20 foot. No, 24 foot. Oh, that shifted. I gotta fix that. I still need to finish digging that out. Another 24. I gotta dig out this crossover to the 88 foot. $280 worth of channel. And I think I put this run in backwards. I really hope that's not the case, and I hope the permit guy doesn't catch that or call me out on it. Because originally it was supposed to come from the septic tank over there, come to a distribution box, and be 3 runs of 90 something, I don't know, whatever. But it was supposed to feed into here, which is why this one's backwards. Again, hopefully he doesn't catch this. But it's literally taken me months to get this far. I gotta do the crossovers, but I am very happy with where I ended today. There's going to be so much backfill. So that is the septic system. Happy New Year! So yesterday I finished getting all the trenches done. It's been an exhausting 4 days. All the trenches are dug out. I have the chambers in. I'll show you that in a second. Today I'm doing the crossovers, and I realized that I've done just a horrible job of doing tutorials. So I figured I'd take some time today while I'm working on this and just kind of walk you through the process a little bit. Kind of some of the things that I learned along the way and whatnot. So I decided to go with the infiltrator system. It's chambers instead of doing gravel and then PVC pipe and then gravel and then a covering and all that. It's less labor intensive in some ways and more in others, I guess is the best way to describe it. It's probably less effort overall, and because in my area the infiltrator system is 30% more efficient, you need only 70%. So in my case, they wanted 400 foot worth of traditional, and with this I got away with 340. Is 340 right? No, 280. I can't remember the number now. Whatever it is, I've recounted it about a dozen times to make sure I had enough. So I got permitted for a 4-bedroom because I really need it, right? Just me and one of the mini trash dogs living here. Right, Ruba? But I figured it gave me a chance to expand later on you know, if I wanted to put in RV spots or a couple of cabins or whatever. I'm permitted, I'm big enough. So, so right now, I just have a temporary setup going to the camper. But this is a 1,090 gallon tank. It's a 2-piece tank. You've seen some of the other videos. I'm glad I went this way. It was cheaper, and it was something I could do myself. Well, I had help. The chambers, easy peasy. Like, you could totally do it yourself. Noah has helped me along the way here and there. But really, at the end of the day, easy enough to do yourself. Now, here, the rule is your trenches have to be a minimum of 2 foot. And with chamber, you can have no more than 2 inches of fall. So, as I did this, basically I dug out at the one of the ends of the trenches, the shallow end of the trench. Like here, because my ground has a slope, this is a 1.5 foot grade difference. So it starts at 2 feet and lands at about 3.5. But it's almost dead level. It's within an inch of itself. You're allowed 2 inches. I figured I'd roll with 1 inch just because I figured it was the easy way to make sure that I wasn't going to have any issues. Now, a couple of notes about that. First of all, if you're using a huge excavator with a 3-foot bucket and all that jazz, knock this out in a heartbeat. You can knock it out in a day or two. I don't have that. So I had to make up things as I went along and kind of figure it out as I went along. So the tractor, because it has such a short boom and such a small bucket, you're digging a straight trench, right? But as you do your sides, the bucket ends up kind of tilting, okay? So when I can't show this very well, but when you go out to the side and you're way out here, your bucket ends up like this. And what ends up happening is your trench turns into a V like this. And then it also comes in slowly as you get really close. So the permit guy was nice enough to point this out to me after my first 30 feet, rather than waiting until I was done. And he walks up, he takes one look at my first trench, which was way over there. And takes one look at it, he goes, too narrow, and walks away. Now, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, at a glance, you can tell that it's too narrow. This is ridiculousness. There's no way that it's too narrow. I measured and remeasured and remeasured. And he goes and grabs one of the pieces of channel and he tosses it in, and sure enough, at the top, it was fine. At the bottom, not so much. And he said, the problem is, you know, he explained to me what the problem is with the boom, with having such a small piece of equipment. So the first 30 feet, Noah and I had to jump in with shovels and scrape the edges and shovel it all out so that it was wide enough at the bottom. Don't know how I never caught it. I mean, I did eventually catch it, I guess. So I knew there had to be a way not to make the trenches too wide, but wide enough to compensate for this problem. And what I came up with either is genius or stupidity. I haven't decided which, but I used the stabilizers. These guys right here. And what I would do is, if I'm digging out to this side, I would put the stabilizer on that side all the way down, and the other one I would just barely have it touch the ground so that the tractor's sitting at a kilter. And as you do that, because now your bucket starts out here, but by the time, you know, when you're up close, your bucket's at an angle, but by the time you're way out here, it actually levels out, and you can scrape the sides. And I wish I had taken video of this. And then you do the same for the other side. So I would trench out 4, 5, 6 feet, whatever, and it would kind of zoom in because, you know, as it gets closer. And then once I get the majority of it kind of roughly level and all that, then I would take that bucket and I would scrape the edges on both sides, scoop out the remainder, and then at that point I would jump into the trench. Now when I jumped into the trench, I would take a 2x4 that I just dropped, my multi-purpose 2x4, and I'd put it across the very top edges like this. And if I do that at the very beginning and I take my tape measure and I measure down to the bottom, 2 foot on the tape measure should be right at the bottom of there, give or take an inch or two. There's some few places where I had to start a little deeper for one reason or another, but that's how I would get the trench started. Then, once I get a nice little pad set up here that I know is exactly level, it's exactly the way I want it, you know, it measures out with the tape measure very nicely, then you can put down your laser level. And what I did with that, again, don't know if it was genius or not, but it's what I did. So I take the laser level. It's not level right now. This is a self-adjusting. I do like this one a lot. I was actually able to see it in the daytime. As long as I put a little shadow over my stick. But it's a self-leveler. You got to be within like 4 degrees in both axes, and then it stops flashing. Like if you're way off, it flashes, and when you're right on the money, it's steady. So I'd set that bad boy up. I'm going to set it like this. And I would take my stick, and I would double check it every time, but it was always the same. And I put a little piece of tape on it with a line, and I put it right in front of it. And of course this is unlevel, but I would double check it every time, and the pen line would line up with the laser line, dead in front of it. So then I knew, okay, that's level. And then I would go and I would bring it over here. You can't see it. Oh, it's all blocked off. But I would work my way down the trench, making sure that I was in the shadow. You know, stick another spot. And as long as my line fell within the yellow, I was an inch up or an inch down. So that was my 2 inches of wiggle room. I tried to keep it close to level as possible, and I would just work, you know, the middle and the sides and do every 6 inches, a foot, whatever. And then you rake it out a little bit, backfill, whatever. And that's how I ended up getting level. Now I know there's a dozen other ways to do this. If I had bigger equipment, I could have dug this way down the trench in front of me and had my laser level, you know, on the wall, the dirt wall, and then I just could have right down to the line. But that didn't work for me because my tractor is too narrow. The wheels are just right on the edge. The back wheels are right on the edge. Front wheels would have been in the trench. And then somebody asked me, well, why didn't you use the front end bucket? You know, why not use the front end bucket? Just, you know, do it that way. Seems so easy. And you would think that. First of all, the bucket's too wide. It's 40 some odd inches. Which would have meant, because I have to have 6 foot of undisturbed dirt in between each trench, it would have meant that my whole field would have ended up way further down. The other problem is that I would have had to build a ramp at the end of each one, and you have to be, you can see my property line, these little, the little flags, a bunch of them are missing because those are for plants. Anyway, my property line's there, and your trenches can't be any closer than 10 foot from your property line, or 10 foot from your water line. There's exceptions to this rule, but that's your general rule. So I wanted to run this thing tight in the corner, Again, I don't think I picked the best place in the world to put this, but whatever, it's here. And then as I went along, I would do, you know, I could dig comfortably about 5 foot at a time. So I dig, and I would usually do like 2 sections, so about 10 foot. Rake it all out, scrape the edges if necessary. I would take one of the end caps and I would drag it down through just to make sure it's not hanging on the wall anywhere. Spots like this I knew were tight, but because I'm running such tight tolerances to there and there, and there to there, you know, you just kind of know that, you know, it's going to be a bit of a pain. But these, once I find one that's not half buried in dirt, so I have to dig it out, basically, I don't know if you can see it here. There it is. So these have a little hooker on them, and you take this channel, you bring it in at about a 45-degree angle, and you kind of scoop and lay. And that works good most of the time, as long as everything's wide enough. If it's not wide enough, what I did is I took a paint scraper, and I just kind of wedged up on this hook a little bit and worked it up so that it popped up over. So, you know, there was spots where it was really tight, and because of that I couldn't do the 45, and that was the solution, is just to sit there, especially the first trench, because Noah and I did not want to hand excavate more than we had to. So you know, using that pop method really worked out well. I could show you if I could figure out where I put my scraper. So as you work through, you got to remember the water has to flow from there all the way to the other end, and it's got to go through all these different channels and crossovers, and each crossover either has to be level or downhill to the next one. So when you're spacing these out, you have to really be thinking about getting the water downhill. So if you've got, you know, 2 trenches side by side, and it's got to go from there to there, but your land runs downhill this way ever so slightly, you've got to start this trench further down at the 2-foot mark, so that when you pick it up in the middle, it's going to be, because the land also slopes that way. So if you're 2 foot there and you run it up, and you start 2 foot here and you run it up, because you have several foot difference, by the time you get to this point you should be close to level or running downhill. And it takes a lot of like monkeying with it. Like, you really got to think it through, and everything went fairly smooth except for the very last section. The last trench I did not figure in to the equation going into the septic tank, because the tank is at a different gradient than everything else. Well, the outlet is anyway. And so I figured in initially, I wasn't thinking, so initially I figured in at the top here, okay, right at the top. I was like, oh yeah, no problem, you know, at the top it'll run across, blah, 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 it's perfect, right? Well, the problem is that's about 4 inches difference from where it was supposed to be. So they have a little indentation at the end of the tank where you're supposed to drill in, because your inlet is supposed to be higher than your outlet. So that way the water comes in and doesn't splish splash and stuff, and then it can run out, so that your water level is going to be underneath your pipes. I'm not even opening this thing again today, because I already did that once. That was gross. But anyway, so that needed to be lower. Well, I didn't discover that until about there. Oh, I was like right here, because it was right after I got this done, and I was 4 inches higher in the trench. I started up here, even though that was the uphill side. I started up here at 2 foot, and I was like, I'll just heap some dirt here if I need to make up the difference. But it was 4 inches too high by the time I got here, because I was figuring based on the top of this, not where the indentation was. So I scraped as much as I could with a bucket, long reach, working each end. And then there was just a lot of hand digging. And that, of course, changed the equation on the crossover trench, which, you know, had a lot of hand digging as well this morning to get that right on the money. These crossovers between, like if you're half an inch off, you know, whatever, it's not going to be the end of the world. This one, hugely important. So, you know, you really got to think through the entire process. Now, one of the things that the permit guy kept telling me, and my brain didn't register it, I could not gather what he meant. He kept saying you got to do everything on contour to cut down how much dirt you move. And this was when we were initially talking about putting it right over here because there's a heavy downhill slope. And he's like, okay, yeah, if you put your tank right here where the orange flags are, or, you know, somewhere up in this area, because originally that was going to be the house site. If you do it there, then you can run your lines on contour going down the hill. And I said, well, I want to be able to drive through there in order to get to the rest of the property. So then we talked about, well, you could do it over here, same idea, and you can kind of see, like, there's a downhill slope. And when he kept saying on contour, my brain says contour is round. It's a curve, right? It's not what he meant. I mean, he did on some level, but that's not what he was getting at. What he meant by on contour is you find your line, like this kind of runs, it's a little downhill right here, right? But you do one here, then you do one here, and then you do one here, and you do one here. And each one is a step lower than the other. It's following this contour, not some round silliness. I don't know what I was thinking of. In doing that, because if you're to dig a trench starting at 2 foot here, and you were to run it out, when your maximum depth can only be 4 foot, you're not going to get very far going this way. And you're going to move a crap ton of dirt on this end because it's going to be this low, right? You know, so the idea is to run it across the hill or find out, you know, kind of where it's level, whether it's an angle or whatever, but it's to run it across the hill so that you're only having to dig 2.5 foot. And then you step it down. Each crossover will end up going slightly downhill, downhill, downhill. Well, my brain didn't get that. That memo did not ever happen. Because had it happened, I probably would have put it in this spot over here somehow, or at least gotten it like across this back edge, down through here, which would have kept it out of the driveway, and it would have put it at the lowest possible point of the property. And in doing that, would have put my septic tank at a very low point in the property. Which means that, you know, when you're looking at this, there's a slight downhill going this way, away from the tank. So now if I ever put anything over there, I've got to run small septic tanks with a dousing method is what they call it, and it basically is a pump that pumps the water out into the main tank and then over, because I'm an idiot. Or I got to put in another septic system at some point. So the things that I learned there, and had I realized any of this before I spent weeks digging out this mess here, because that took forever. I built a ramp. I built a ramp out of there. I started out just, you know, using the backhoe. And I realized because this needed to be 5 foot as a dead minimum, this thing has a dig depth of 6 foot. But that's assuming straight down from the very end of the tractor. Once you start working outward, you can't reach down as far. And when you're trying to do 5 foot out from this edge to the middle, suddenly your 5 foot is like 4 foot or 3.5 or whatever it ended up being. So I was like, well, that's not going to work. So I decided, I ramped it, and I would dig it out with the backhoe. You know, I'd break it up with the backhoe and then drag it, put it in piles, put rocks in piles, whatever. But I had to do this all with a backhoe, or with a front end loader. That was a headache, but it was the only way to accomplish it with the equipment I have. That is probably one of the biggest things that you're going to learn along the way, is the limitations of your equipment, what it can and can't do, and how to accomplish what you need with what you got. I could have gone and rented out a big backhoe and all of that and whatever. Would have been no big deal. But I bought the tractor already, and my intention behind buying it was to save money, to save enough money on doing the septic and other projects to counteract the cost of it. I saved $15,000 in labor on my septic system. Almost paid for the tractor at this point. You know, so you got to learn your limitations. For a couple of grand, I could have rented out a big excavator, knocked it all out on the weekend, maybe a couple extra days, whatever, and been done with it. But that was a couple extra grand, and I'm trying to scrimp every penny. So, you know, it's keep in mind what you have and really balancing out, making things easier versus spending money versus, you know, working with what you have and just taking your time. This took me months to do, you know, between bad weather and small equipment and everything else. It took me months, but I didn't have to rent equipment. I got it done, and I could do it in little chunks as I felt comfortable. So it is what it is.